Okay, my name is Larry Bowman, and I'm a second generation reader of the Urantia Book. My dad was in the forum really from the beginning, from 1924 on. So he was there when in 1925 the forum started asking questions that helped formulate the Urantia papers, and he remained in Chicago until the late 20s, and then moved to Ohio, and that's where he married, and where my sister and I were born. And then in 1943, at the height of the war, he had to move back to Chicago, and so he became active again in the forum. In the intermediate years, he was able to attend Sunday meetings when he could. And so for a long time, he was going to the Sunday meetings on his own. And then my sister, who is 7 years older than I, that's Carolyn Kendall, many of you will probably know her. She had graduated from high school, and he got her into the forum. And then she got her fiance, Tom Kendall, in. And then by that time, my mom, who'd been a long-time holdout, she thought, well, if it's good enough for my future son-in-law, I guess it's good enough for me, so she got in. So by this time, I was about to graduate from grade school here in Chicago, and by this time I was hearing a lot about Urantia, and it sounded interesting to me, so I thought might be interested in joining. As I say, I just graduated from high school, grade school. And Dr. Sadler thought maybe I should wait a year. So in the meantime, Carolyn and Tom were married, and Mom, Dad, and I moved out to the suburbs. And I started high school, so it was a year later. It was in June 1954 when I had my interview with Dr. Sadler, because back then it was still a closed meeting, a closed group, and you had to be interviewed by him. And he told me, things that I had largely already heard from Dad and Carolyn about the sleeping subject, and all these messages and other things that were coming through the sleeping subject. And what else he might have told me then, I really can't remember any more. Two are separated from stories that I've heard in the years since then from other people. But anyway, so I was able to start attending the meetings, which actually didn't meet during the summer. I guess I went to my first picnic, and then I know I was at 533 on August 21st, 1954. I heard Bill Sadler read the story about Rebecca, and he got a little choked up. And he says, oh, there must be something in the air. And then in the fall, the meetings started up, and we were in part one, I guess. And so the procedure was that it was usually Bill Sadler who would be reading the papers, one paper each week. And during that first year, this was my sophomore year in high school, I think there were only 2 meetings I missed that whole year. And then on Wednesday nights, I started coming in with Mom and Dad, because Dad was a member of the 70, and would read the papers, read a paper on my own downstairs in the office at 533. And on my own, I started at part 3, History of Urantia. So there was still, by the time the book was published in October 1955, I'd heard quite a bit of parts 1 and 2, and had read probably not an awful lot of part 3. So I doubt that I'd really gotten to part 4 yet, the Jesus Papers. Well, then of course when the book was published, on my own, I probably started reading part 4. So the First Society was formed in June 1956, and C.C. Forster just gave me a copy of the membership book, and it does show that I'm Mom. Well, actually, all my family, including my brother-in-law Tom Kendall, we were all charter members of the First Society. So by then I was 17.
Wow.
So I'll just back up and say that at the time that the book was published, I was the youngest reader in the forum at the time the book was published. So
Wow.
since then, I became a founder of the Urantia Society in 1961, and although almost right away I became an inactive member, because then I went off to college. Even though I'd been on high school for 4 years, I didn't really seriously start college until September '61. So I went off to Northern Illinois University. So for most of the '60s, I was busy getting my bachelor's and master's degrees, and then I left Illinois in '67. So eventually I became a member at large, and I moved to Arizona in '73. Really didn't get involved with the study, I guess it was '78 that I got involved with the study group again, and that's really all I needed, because I'd been away from study groups for several years. And then in the my first conference was the first Snowmass conference in '81, and then some of us who attended were inspired to put on a regional there in the Phoenix area, and we had a good attendance. A lot of the longtime people came and attended. Julia Fenderson, I never met her before. She came over from LA, and by the late that decade, we made efforts to help form a society, and which was installed in 1990. And so that's the Grand Canyon Society. Well, it's now called Grand Canyon Urantia Book Society.
Uh-huh.
And then in 2010, I was elected to a vacancy on the General Council, and 2012 to a full 9-year term, and most of those years since then, I've been Secretary General. So.
Do you have any other memories you would want to share from your experiences in the early days with Sadler and Bill Sadler, or anybody else, or what it was like being in the forum?
I knew most of the, I guess I knew everybody on the Surviving Contact Commission. Dr. Lena, of course, had been gone for a long time. She died just shortly after I was born, so I never knew her. I never really knew Bill Sadler that well. Dr. Sadler, I knew him, but I'll tell you, the one I felt the closest to was, believe it or not, was Mrs. Kellogg. I always called her Mrs. Kellogg, never called her by her first name. Her husband Wilfred died actually in '56. I never had too long a chance to know him. Christy, I really sort of got to know better, and then people like Leon Sadler and Marion Rowley and some of them. Dr. Sadler was a great man, and I guess I sort of looked upon him as a great man. I don't know that I was necessarily intimidated by him, but he was a very pleasant, and of course he was well into his 80s by then. I've just turned 80 now, so
Wow.
I'm not going to make jokes anymore about old people. But other than the sense that, I like to say that when I was a 15-year-old attending the forum, and there were all these old people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and so forth.
So the group was quite elderly at the time.
It was, and as my sister often likes to say, they tended to dress old too. Especially the women. I mean, they were wearing long skirts and everything, and you just don't see that anymore, even people of my generation. So.
And what were your parents' professions, or what were their lives like?
Well, my mom was she had been a school teacher, but once she got married, she just was a homemaker. Dad was a railway mail clerk. Back in the days when there was a mail car on trains, and his route was always from Chicago to Pittsburgh and back. So actually, once he moved to Ohio, what he had to do was to get on the train there in the town that he was living in Ohio, come to Chicago, and then start 2 round trips, and then he would go home. So that was one reason why at the height of the war, he moved back to Chicago to make it a little easier.
What was his name?
His name was Clarence Bowman.
Uh-huh.
He is mentioned in Larry Mullins's book, History of the Urantia Papers. He was one of the original 36 counselors, but unfortunately he died in 1959, so he did not live out his 9-year term. He was also on the one of the original members of the Publications Committee. Leon Sadler was chair.
Do you know how
of that.
he came into contact with the Sadlers? Or with the...
I believe I remember him saying that he was having migraine headaches, and he knew somebody from my dad. Both my parents are from Kentucky, and Dad had run into somebody here in Chicago, whom he had known in the town from Kentucky where he is from, and that guy knew. I guess mentioned to him to go see Dr. Sadler, and then. I guess almost right away, Dr. Sadler told him about the Sunday meetings, which had just started up. And that was, so Dad was really going to the forum for about a year before the Urantia Revelation itself started early in 25.
Wow.
I've always wondered what questions my dad might have helped formulate to, to help bring forth the papers, but I don't think I have any information about that. I do have copies of his diary from those early years.
Really?
Wow. But what he was doing was he was years later he crossed out the names of the papers that were read, although I think you can kind of decipher them.
Yeah.
It seems to me my sister did make a list of the original titles of the papers.
Yeah.
Just FYI, I mean, some of the titles did change over the years. The papers expanded.
Yeah, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of professional life did you have?
I became a librarian.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So I had a 34-year career as a librarian. I worked in academic libraries for a few years. I lived back in I was librarian of Defiance College in Defiance, Ohio, and that's the town where Carolyn and I were born. That was from 68 to 73, and then in 73 I moved out to Scottsdale, Arizona, suburb of Phoenix, and worked at Scottsdale Public Library for 28 years and then retired in 2001.
Did you ever see people get introduced to the Urantia book at the library?
I remember some. I can think of one or two patrons coming and asking, if we had the Urantia book, or one person I distinctly remember saying the Book of Urantia.
Yeah.
And I probably sort of vetoed patron confidentiality by calling her up at home that evening and said, "Hey, we have a study group." I probably shouldn't have done that, but she never came. But
are there any particular things that you remember that motivated you to start reading the Urantia book at such a young age?
Mainly just hearing about it through the rest of the family. But I will say that I think when I was 12 years old, my church youth group did visit the Baha'i Temple, which is over here in the Chicago suburbs, and that really impressed me. And just what I learned from that, I thought, well, there's some principles here that really appeal to me. So I thought I might be interested in becoming a Baha'i.
Wow.
But that was about the same time that I started hearing about the Urantia papers.
So you were just at a spiritual searching, kind of philosophical searching.
Well, Dad raised me to believe that there was life on other planets, and that on this world that all religions essentially worship the same God, and so that's why Baha'i appealed to me,
Yeah.
and and why the Urantia book eventually appealed to me too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, you're quite welcome.
What a wonderful interview.
Well, thank you.